stripe to not knock this cord out and make it go off the TV. So we'll hope that you can remember that. Good morning. We are at Unity of Springfield on this beautiful Sunday morning. Sun is shining. And everyone, the energy is already great. I've been listening to conversation as I was getting set up, and it's always one of the things I love about this place is you never know what conversation you're going to be overhearing, what little idea might come to you through someone else's exploration. And anyway, that's one of the things I love about Unity of Springfield. This morning, we are going to be having a discussion on emotional intelligence and spiritual development. And so, I think I've told you guys before, I always pick a topic and then it gets really big and then I have to bring it back down to something and then I think I have it arranged and then I decide that I want to do it completely different. And anyway, so this is where we're at this morning. What I decided to do is we're going to talk about the emotional intelligence piece, and then next week we'll bring it together with all the spiritual development and spiritual intelligence part. But just to start off, so intelligence, or your IQ, is defined as the ability to learn or understand or to deal with new or trying situations, the skilled use of reason, the ability to apply knowledge to manipulate one's environment or to think abstractly as measured by objective criteria. And so, IQ is typically measured with standardized testing. That's how you end up with an IQ score. And what they do is compare your performance with the performance of others in your same age group. And so, when you look at IQ and you do searches on things like, can you improve your IQ? A lot of the research will say that typically, your IQ score doesn't change or fluctuate that much based on your age because it's constantly being compared against other people in your age group. So it tends to stay, fairly constant with the absence of trauma. There is a lot of research that says when trauma happens, that trauma can impact a lot of different things, and IQ score is one of the things that it can impact because the way standardized tests are done, a brain who has experienced trauma is not thinking along the same pathways as one who has not experienced trauma. And so some of those skills or tests of your abilities just are not, they're not designed for a brain that has experienced significant trauma. It's basically, is really what it comes down to. And there's not yet been, I don't know of an IQ test that's like IQ test for the traumatized brain, where they would actually, yeah, Wendy?
Well, I just say that there's nothing that will make you learn how to solve problems fast and easy when you've got someone going to hurt you if you don't.
Right, so it's like a whole different skill set. Like your brain has to wire itself completely different. And so that's like these intelligence tests are set up for people whose brains have not had to wire themselves so drastically in that way.
We would do dishes. We'd each have a part of doing dishes. If you ever got behind doing the dishes, it was a beating. So you learn how to do things fast. You learn to watch everything. You learn to see everything. So
right,
it's incredible.
Yeah, and so then if you're sitting down to do a standardized IQ test, and that's the lens that your brain assesses every situation through, those standardized questions sound a lot different to that brain, right? And so so they're saying it's the IQ score. It measures how you can apply the knowledge or think abstractly based on this set of questions, right?
Well, I will only say the lowest IQ in my siblings is 120. And the highest end is 140.
So you feel like maybe it helped strengthen some of the, so maybe, depending on the type of trauma. Yeah, Jerry?
Yeah, I was reading where in the 70s, there was a group that they had seen geniuses and what made a genius. Did you see that? But anyway, So this group out of the Harvard University went and studied 5-year-old children. And what they discovered was 5-year-old children, 98% of them were genius. And then they went back and they discovered by the time they turned 7 or 8 and had been in school for 3 or 4 years, the number was right around 37 or 38%. And by the time they got into high school and graduated into college, the number is 2%. So we all started out as a genius.
Yeah. And there was some of that in the research that it says certain age periods are where growth would more typically happen as far as an IQ test score. And that's why, like, these IQ test scores, you know, it's one way to measure things, and that's what we're kind of talking about today. And so, yes, like that 0 to 5, your brain is very malleable and it's trying to process as much information as possible. And then they said there's another time period for most individuals in their teenage years where it's kind of like before our brain solidifies into adulthood. There's another span of time where we're trying to assimilate knowledge very quickly. And so they will sometimes see some fluctuations in scores in those 2 time periods. And then there's like this, it kind of goes up, and then there's a point in where they say it's like our intelligence kind of stabilizes for our age group, and then you have new thoughts and technologies and things coming in, and so you start to see, if you do IQ testing when we get into our older age, we see a decline in the actual IQ test score, but you haven't actually lost any of the skills that you've had. So it's kind of an interesting, because it's that comparison group always, that's what kind of determines this steadiness of the IQ score. And so the other intelligence, one of the other intelligences, is emotional intelligence. And so this is the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. And so the cool thing about emotional intelligence is it's very much can be changed over time. It is skills that you can practice and learn. And you know, they talk about some people are just naturally more adept at certain aspects, and we could probably argue that there was some nurture in there too, that maybe they started out life in an environment that was more in tune with some of these things. But many studies have shown that it's absolutely possible to learn, develop, and enhance your emotional intelligence over time. And when it was first brought out, emotional intelligence was called social intelligence. It was like seen as a component of your IQ, but then it got moved out to its own thing. And then your spiritual intelligence is a higher dimension of intelligence beyond the ego that has access to mature qualities and advanced capabilities of the true self. That we see that as wisdom, compassion, integrity, joy, love, creativity, peace. And it is the deeper sense of meaning and purpose that we feel, and improves a wide range of important skills, life skills, and it could be work skills as well. And so again, like emotional intelligence, your spiritual intelligence, which could also be called spiritual maturity or spiritual development, can absolutely be cultivated through practice over time. And you can, you know, I would think that many of us who have been coming to Unity, I would hope that we would say my spiritual intelligence has definitely improved or changed in my time here. Yeah.
Just a question, when it's saying spiritual intelligence, most of my family would not see my growth as a growth in spiritual intelligence because I do not espouse what they believe. So I wondered how that plays a role.
Yeah, so we'll probably talk more about it next week. But so for some of the big work on spiritual intelligence, there is a distinction, like they actually say, like true spiritual intelligence does not subscribe to any dogma. It is about the pure connection to something outside of yourself. And however you define that, it could be that you are a spiritually intelligent individual attending a Baptist church and following Baptist dogma, or that you're, a Muslim or a Hindu. Like, it's about how do you put that connection to something greater outside of yourself, and the faith in that, how does that come together in your life and change your skills. But yeah, and so some people don't like the term spiritual intelligence. They like spiritual maturity or spiritual growth, spiritual development. But when we're putting it into this paradigm of the intelligences, it is, there's a lot of research that calls it spiritual intelligence.
I really come to the conclusion that everything is validation. I just have to validate your belief. It's true to you. It's okay.
Right, because we can't sit in someone else's
I
perspective,
don't know
right? So
what church they're going to, or what religion they believe in, or wherever they're at. They are having their experience, and their experience is true to them. I don't have to follow them.
Mm-hmm.
We don't follow anybody, but I sure cannot tell him that he's wrong.
yeah.
But is that the same as regular intelligence? You know how sometimes you have fog moments or duh moments? Can you spiritually sometimes go through a duh moment?
Shit.
Oh, I think absolutely. Yeah, I think it's with anything else, even when you look at an IQ test, a regular IQ test, it's not just one, they come up with a cumulative number, like one number, but there's different sections of that test, and so you can score higher in one area and lower in another. And so I think that's the same with any part of our being, is we can have growth in one area and not in another, and then it has to catch up, and so over time, we can make changes in those different facets. But
So it's a cumulative effort.
yeah, I just think that we never, hopefully we never stop growing and learning and improving, and we still have those, we talked about a lot, like life is happening all around you, and so there's still those times where you get blocked or cut off from source. And maybe you have a moment where you're like, oh, I forgot how connected I am to source, and wouldn't it have been nice to go through that experience remembering instead of forgetting? And so what am I going to do next time to keep that peace inside, so that I remember always that connection, and I don't have to have another moment, like you said. Yeah, Don.
It's interesting how you can have people who are genius in one area and have no foggy idea what's going on anywhere else. In other words, they could be a mathematical genius who is a recluse and doesn't know how to deal with people, or doesn't know how to deal with his neighbor when he's chopping down a tree.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about here. So this chart shows, it's saying that your IQ, if you're the whole left brain, right brain, so your IQ is more of a right brain, or a left brain process of serial processing. And when you look that up, so serial processing is sequential processing without overlap. So that is, I'm going through the line, I'm dealing with this problem, and then I move to the next problem, and everything stays in a very organized line. So I finish one object, and then I move to the next object, and I figure out what's going on with that. And so that's where you get the mathematical genius, right? Because math, numbers, there's a process, there's formulas, I go through, and that's your serial processing. I can do that really well.
Scientists do that, yeah.
Yeah, but then your EQ, your emotional intelligence, is over on the right brain area. And that is parallel processing. And so parallel processing is the part of your brain that simultaneously is processing things lots of things at the same time. And I could be done with this thing, but still working on this thing. Kind of like if you think of it as a computer, like I close this window, but this window is still running in the background. and I'm waiting for information before I do this. And that's your emotional intelligence, is like looking at so many more facets and not having to process in that straight line. And so then they say your spiritual intelligence is synchronous processing. So it's the whole brain. So it's your spiritual intelligence, because it's connected to source and can do all things, right? It's pulling it all together. And so a strong person with a strong SQ, spiritual intelligence, spiritual maturity, however we want to term that for us that makes sense, what the research is saying is that person is using more of their whole brain more of the time. So it knows how to integrate it all together, which kind of makes sense to me. If that's the most connected to source, then you're connected to your this human body and all the things that it's capable of doing in a stronger way. And so it makes sense that you would be using more of that together. And then this, here we're going to get you an equation, Dawn. So I saw this and I was like, what? But then looking at it, so what it's saying is that SQ is our spiritual intelligence, and it is the combination of our IQ, our intellectual intelligence, our EQ, our emotional intelligence, but it's multiplied by P, which is presence. And so that's where you get to the spiritual part. So that's the importance of talking about EQ today, is that it's one component of getting to that spiritual maturity, spiritual intelligence, like I said, whatever term is more comfortable for you. It is that our spiritual intelligence or maturity is magnified by our IQ, which stays fairly consistent, and we could change a little bit, but not as much. But our EQ, we have a lot of power to change, and then that helps us to increase our spiritual maturity.
That's a clever presentation. I said, that's a clever presentation.
Oh, I know, I was like, oh, that's interesting. All right, so getting into the 4 skills of emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence, it's interesting that the first person to talk about emotional intelligence was in the 1920s. And it was during a big IQ movement when there was lots of standardized testing getting developed. And there were some people involved in that testing that said, you know, there's this other piece of this, and we're going to call it social intelligence. And it's not as easy to test in these standardized tests, but it seems like it's really important. And there was a bunch of people who were really buying into the standardized tests. This is Amy's lay terms, like in my own words, how history happened. But there were some people that were really, like I said, into this standardized testing, and they could see all of these applications of being able to have a standardized test score for people. And so they were like, yeah, that social intelligence part sounds good, but we don't really know how to measure it, and we can't put it into this test, so we're going to move forward with these IQ tests, and we're going to use those as the basis for a lot of what we're doing. And you have to think back then, so talking about some of these things that seem so normal for us to talk about now, like self-awareness and all the, self-management, social awareness, that sounded like woo-woo stuff to a lot of scientists in the 1920s, right? like, that's not scientific, that's this other thing that we're not going to worry about. And so it went on for a long time. There was a little bit of a resurgence in the 50s that it started coming back up in the conversation, but still didn't really take hold in the community. And it wasn't until the early 90s that it was recoined as emotional intelligence. And there started to be a lot of research on, can we actually measure the level of emotional intelligence in people, and does it make a difference? And so what they found was that our intellect, so that IQ part, accounts for 20% of our success in life. So if you only look at the IQ scores of people, and then how successful, and I'm not sure whose definition of success, but whatever definition of success they were looking at, their IQ score in and of itself was only indicative 20% of the time to the level of success. But when they factored in emotional intelligence, social class, and then one of the studies that said factored in a luck rate, and I think it's more like what environment were you born into? Were you born into a little more privilege than somebody else's? So they like calculated that as a luck score. But those other things comprise like 80% of how successful people were in this research. And so, and an especially important research study at Yale in the early 90s was conclusive that emotional intelligence is a major indicator of achievement. And so they said, this explains what people have talked about, that you can have two people with the relatively same IQ score, but they have vastly different levels of success in their work life, their personal life, etc. And it really hinges on that EQ, emotional intelligence. And so like I said, the four parts of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So we'll talk about each of those. So it starts with our self-awareness, and so this is really about understanding ourselves, knowing what pushes our own buttons and why. And if you think about, it all ties together, and this is where my brain needed to like separate things out. Because as we're talking about the emotional intelligence stuff, what I realized is there's truly so many parallels in just talking about emotional intelligence and so many of the materials that we have in Unity available to us, because it's so integrated. I mean, it just shows how integrated this is into our spiritual maturity and our spiritual development. And it also talks about, your self-awareness, and this is, Wendy, where you were saying, like, our past and our self-image plays a role in how we choose to interpret other people's behavior, how we act and how we respond to things, and the effect we have on others. So we've talked about that in, other classes as well, that lens that we're seeing things through really plays a part. And I love this quote: "The greatest of faults is to be conscious of none." I was like, that is awesome.
Does it mean nothing?
Hmm?
Does none mean nothing?
No, just none of it.
Like the greatest
You're
of
not
faults
conscious
is to
of
be
your
conscious
faults.
of no faults.
Of no faults.
Like no faults
Oh,
of
I
your,
see.
like to
Okay.
not be aware of your where you could your growing edge, where you could learn and grow, or where someone else could learn and grow.
And Don, don't worry, it took me a second to get that too.
I'm pretty slow.
I had to read it a few times, yeah.
You got it right off the bat, what does that say?
Yeah, I had to, yeah.
And so this is really about, like I said, learning yourself, like how do you respond and what pushes your buttons. And so things that we can do to improve our self-awareness is practice mindfulness. So again, yeah.
Well, I just, an element there when you're talking about self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to becoming self-aware at all, I was a much more socially, I fit in the world a lot better socially, because I could become what anybody needed me to become. I was like a chameleon, if you wanted to sit and cuss people out, I could do that, and if you wanted to be super religious, I could be that. And in the quest for self-awareness, I'm not nearly as socially acceptable in the world. So I just don't know. I warn others that might be the case.
aware, more spiritually mature, you may lose some relationships along the way. It's probably true, yeah, Aaron.
This kind of relates to that. It's just like, outside of work, I tend to have, they say, I tend to be one type of personality compared to, like, at work, I may be a little bit more gruff, a little bit more, I don't got time for foolishness. That makes sense. But it seems to get worse with age for me.
So some of that is like adaptive behavior, right? Because of the environment you're in. So I think, like I recently, for part of a group that I'm participating in at work, we had to do the DISC assessment. And it's like a personality leadership, like gives you you are a letter this, and this is typical of people in this group, and it kind of gives you an idea of like, you probably communicate like this, it's probably best if people who are communicating with you do these things. But my point in that is that there's a part of that it breaks it out into, this is how you naturally show up in the world, and this is probably how the adaptive behaviors that you've taken on to function in your work environment. And so it's a very real thing. That like there's expectations of you in a job world that maybe aren't there in your everyday life. And so you do have to shift often, a lot, depending on your job, depending on what you do. But a lot of people have to shift and adapt a little bit their natural inclinations to survive in whatever work world.
So what I'm hearing is I probably haven't adapted well.
No, well, or it's an adaptive style. Like maybe your work calls for you to be a little less lenient than you are in your normal everyday. Like I don't know what your job function is, but maybe it's a part of this is the expectation at my job.
Right.
Instead-
That's it.
Don't bother me, I'm working.
Well, so like for instance, people who like do jobs where their expectation is to be like on a phone call center, and there's like a script and there's expectations of this is how I go through. Like that might not be how they would have a conversation with someone that they know or someone that they just met on the street. That's not how they would structure a conversation. Or if you're calling to recoup money for a company and someone's telling you everything that just happened to them this week, and this is why I can't give you any money. In your regular everyday life, you might have a lot of compassion and empathy, and that conversation would turn into how can I help you get resources and all of that. But if it's your job to say, I hear you and here's what I need from you today, or here's what's gonna, you have to adapt to that.
And an extreme of that is when you're talking to a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, you're going to use a different vocabulary, and a different attitude. You're going to be gentle. You're going to be loving. You're going to be outgoing. And if you're an employee, you're going to be hard-nosed sometimes.
Or a teenager.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, John, I hope everybody talks to 2-year-olds the way you just described.
Well, the lovely thing is, as you get more spiritual aware and stuff, so I haven't looked for work. If I wanted work, I just say, I want work, I want it this long, and it shows up and it's there that long. And I want a job where when I walk in the door, they go, she's here! And they hug me, and they're so happy to see me. Is that my work?
That happens every time.
And so you don't always have to adapt. Once you get the spiritual understanding, the metaphysical understanding of how it works, then you don't have to do that quite so much.
Yeah, but I think it's a real part of human behavior, that the way the world, our society is structured right now, there's people doing jobs where they have to adapt in order to maintain that job. And maybe they're not always going to maintain that job as they get more spiritually aware or more emotionally intelligent. They go, you know what, this isn't a good environment for me, and I'm gonna dream up something different. Absolutely. So ways to improve your self-awareness, mindfulness, so that's paying attention on purpose to what is happening in the present moment. And here's the kicker, without judging it as right or wrong. And so that is the just, be in the moment. That nothing is right or wrong, it just is. And that can help you improve your self-awareness, because then instead of looking at whatever behavior, thoughts, or feelings you're having as right or wrong, good or bad, they just are, and then you can get really curious about exploring, what that is. Yeah, Jerry?
Yeah, for me, the more I've got really into me, knowing me, I'm doing myself a disservice if I'm not me. Okay?
Mhm.
There's a point where I have to go, well, if this job demands that I do and be someone else, I just can't do that job anymore. I mean, I drive a school bus now, and I drove truck where I was just in the truck. I didn't have anybody be around me, and most of the time I was my own boss. And with the kids, it's like I can be totally me. I can make mistakes. I can even tell the kids, you're right, I'm probably wrong. Okay? And they like that. And so we have to, it's like, I'm feeling for you. And, sometimes we just gotta go, I gotta start finding my way out of here. Sometimes, I don't know.
I use a lot of bless your hearts.
Yeah, there you go. Well, but you understand what I'm saying, is that just, if you have to become something that you're not, to keep a job that you don't like, maybe there's some other place for you, and he keeps tapping on your door going, yeah, but you can come over here, you can come over here. I'm just saying.
I have a question.
Look,
In this idea of not being any right or wrong, I'm having trouble fitting murder and rape and atrocities into the fact that there's no right or wrong. I don't know how to process that.
well, can I answer that? The thing is, we all came in here with a plan. Both of those people made that plan together before they got here. It was an experience that they had to go through. It was part of their paradigm. And so it is not right or wrong. It doesn't matter. It is what happened. These people learned something from it, and this is what they needed.
All right, and I think in other classes too, so instead of labeling it as right or wrong, like good or evil, if we're looking at it as, is it coming from a place of connection or separation? And so we can say murder is not coming from a place of connection with spirit. Like, that may be something, that's my view of that
Yeah,
is
thank you.
that it is, I can't imagine a person who's fully connected to spirit doing that action. And so I see it as, like that's a disconnect, but not that it is inherently evil. Susan, what did you want to say?
Well, I've told this story 100 times in this church, but I'm gonna tell it again. Again.
Yeah.
Neil Donald Walsh's book, children's book, The Little Soul of the Sun, is a story about an angel in heaven, and he's talking to God, and he says, I want to learn to forgive, God. He goes, whoa, I can't help you with that because there's nothing to forgive. It's all already forgiven. And the little angel said, oh, but I really want to learn to forgive. So this other little angel comes up and he says, tell you what, I'll go down there and I'll do something real awful, and that way you can learn to forgive me. And the first little angel goes, oh my God, you would do that? You would give up all the love and peace and wonderfulness for me? And he goes, yeah, but you gotta do something for me too. And he says, anything, I'd do anything. You have to remember who I am, so I don't forget.
Yeah.
So there you go, the bad guy is really the
You're a
goodest
good
guy.
guy. I like
Yeah,
that.
like, and I think it's, but it is hard, and it's hard especially if
Sure
those
it
things,
is.
if those things are happening to someone you know and love, or if they're happening on a large scale, or like, it can be hard, yeah.
But
You
it's
know,
just
I just-
evolution of the planet.
In things like that, I just have to take it back to underlying principles that as I understand metaphysics and my relationship with Source and who I am. And if I am this creature that has come here to learn lessons and to grow and to prove my worth and blah, 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 then it's a whole different ballgame. But if I'm an amazing expression of God, coming into this physical arena to express and create and mix it up and add to all that is, and to have experiences, sometimes in the freedom to utilize that power, we're going to create some things that we really don't want and don't appreciate creating in that moment. But it's okay because we're free to create. There's never going to come a time when there's someone going to say, you created wrong, you're out. Or, you know, the very nature of who we are is always calling us home. That's why you can't do those things and be happy. That's why you can't do those things and feel good. You might feel stronger for a while just because it feels stronger to be a perpetrator, I think, than a victim at some point. But it feels much stronger to be an assertive person that doesn't need to play in perpetrator-victim energy. And we're all going to find our way there. So when you see that, and you go, I'm having these dreams right now, and my biological father, who was about as bad as you can get in every way, I'm having these dreams where I've crossed over, and we're sitting there in the same place, learning to love each other, and to remember who we really are. And I think that's the future for anybody involved in that. So when you can see that at all, that spiritual awareness, then, I don't know, would you go, okay, now everybody here is going to do it my way? I think it's much better that everybody comes here and gets to play and experience and say yes and no.
Kind of like poison ivy, is it really necessary?
Yeah.
I heard it described once as if we're all here trying to discover what we are, what the universe is, we also have to figure out what we are not. And so some of us kind of have to, like she was saying, take a sacrifice and hurt themselves really badly, distort their energy really badly in order for the universe as a whole to figure out, okay, that's not what I want. Now I know that.
Okay.
Yeah, can I say this real quick? Christ, whenever he walked the earth, he didn't heal anyone. What he saw in you was the perfect Christ that you were. And by your faith, you healed yourself. And so when you look at each and every person as that perfect being that they are, you can learn to love them completely and totally. And I'm working on that. I have my issues, but I understand that is, for me, my ultimate goal.
Yeah, and so it kind of plays it, so this identifying and describing your emotions as improving self-awareness, so that there is a component of that if you have the ability to identify and name emotions as they arise in you, that it gives you some options. So you can decide that you don't want to feel that way and you want to do something different. You can recognize that the feeling is about something in your past rather than this present moment now, and you can decide to think about it differently. You can think more clearly about what got you to this place, and it would allow you to feel more fully and consider the feelings of other people. So, kind of all-encompassing. And then accurate self-assessment. So so being open to what's around you, valuing feedback from others, having a sense of humor and perspective, having the capacity to reflect and learn from experience and be open to change. And I thought this was interesting. One of the things I read, it said you have to be willing to turn off the autopilot and notice what you're noticing and how it makes you feel and what you can learn about yourselves to truly be paying attention and to truly be self-aware.
And then you go,
So,
I
yeah,
could have
like,
had a VA.
yeah, like turn off the autopilot. And if we really think about how often we allow ourselves to go into autopilot throughout our days, it's kind of disturbing when you really start to notice how, you know, you do a string of 10 things and then you stop and you go, oh, I mean, how many of us have, oh, did I take my medicine this morning? I gotta really think about this. Do I remember picking up the cup and taking it? Do I remember getting the pills out of the bottle? And then it's because we're just like in this autopilot mode of the things that happen on a regular basis. And so we can do that with our emotional selves too. Like get in autopilot of like, oh, this thing happens, this is just this is how I feel about it. I don't have a thought about why am I feeling this way? Could I change it or do anything different? And so being self-aware is changing that relationship. And then going into using that awareness to self-manage. So this is where we have awareness of our emotions and we're gonna stay flexible and positively direct our behavior. And we're managing emotional reactions to situations and people. And so this allows us to really balance between ourselves and others. And I thought this was an interesting thing in a lot of the reading I was doing. They were talking, and as it relates to spiritual intelligence, is that sometimes when we're working on that spiritual maturity and we are learning about the self and we're becoming more self-aware, we get stuck there and think that that's the place, like, oh, I need to focus on myself. But we live in a world with other people. And so unless you're going to go sit in the mountains by yourself and not interact with anyone else, there is still a component of this human experience on this plane where you have to be able to manage what you're learning about yourself and still interact with the people around you. So it can't just all be about you and what you need, but it can be about what you need and how you can see that happen within this group. Yeah, Wendy.
There's nothing like getting around people to see how spiritually evolved you really is. In the desert, alone with my dog, I am like way out there.
Absolutely. Get around those button pushers and then we're like, oh, maybe I didn't deactivate that one.
Do we have time for another question? I'm
Sure. We got time for whatever, Don.
We've been talking about the brain almost completely, and I'm wondering about the work of HeartMath. Perhaps you've heard of it. They talk about the influence of the electrical application of the brain and the magnetic application of the heart, and somehow they work together, and I've never ever been able to justify or to synthesize how that works.
Yeah,
Do you
so
have any thought on it?
I didn't I heard that and I've read that before, but I didn't reread any of that in combination with what I was reading about emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence. But maybe I'll look at it, and next week when we're talking about the spiritual intelligence side, maybe we can bring some of that in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, this is just my own stuff or anything. When you begin to study spirituality or do any of these things, there are all kinds of modalities that can help you focus. And you can study power of crystals and chakras and this and heart and mind and I don't discount any of that, because without something to focus on to help you to stay in there. But I really wonder, for me, the only validity that is does it help you focus, or does it take you down a trail where you're so confused, trying to figure it all out, and you run from one thing to another thing to another thing, and now the fairies are going to solve it. And like Emma Curtis Hopkins would say, if you believe in the power of a dead sardine head, it'll heal anything. It's our belief. And the more we can begin to utilize the methodologies to increase that, that's where, for me, the power comes.
Yeah, and I think for some people, it is about seeing that connection between what we talk about and like scientific reasoning and scientific evidence of some of those things. Like that helps them focus and helps them with their faith in what is. So yeah. So improving self-management, again, pay attention to your emotional triggers. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? And then create strategies for alternate responses. And one of the practical suggestions was keeping a journal of like when your button gets pushed, and journal like what was going on, what happened, what created that, what was building up to that situation. How did it feel in your body, becoming acutely aware of your physical response, your emotional response, and then writing down what's something I could try to do differently, like what's a strategy, and then like kind of practicing that in your mind. What would that have felt like, or how could that feel different? And because it's all about really becoming aware and then intentionally changing the behavior in the moment, so that we have less moments where we have to think, oh, what could I have done better, and more moments where we think, man, I really did okay in that situation. Like that was progress. One of the examples was, if your response to anger is you pick up the nearest object and you chuck it across the room, and you can go from that to clenching your fists, and that's progress. And so, even if you take just baby steps to getting to something different, not only is that better for you, but it's better for those around you if you're not throwing things. It also said practice silencing negative or doomsday self-talk. We've talked about that a lot. So training yourself to really evaluate the truth of your thoughts. And some of the questions that were in some of the materials, like, am I allowing emotions about something that may never even happen? So am I pre-painting something? Am I blaming myself for something that I have absolutely no control over? That generates a lot of negative self-talk a lot, right? Is there clear evidence that this is actually the truth? So those are questions we can ask ourselves in the moment to improve our self-management. And then practice changing the variables before responding. I found this one to be really powerful. Sometimes not in mine, but when I'm coaching someone else through something because they asked me to, not unsolicitedly. But saying something like, if a different person was involved, would you still feel the same way? So if you weren't talking about you, if you were talking about someone else you love, would you talk about them the same way you're talking about yourself right now? Or would you think the same action needs to happen if it was someone else? If it happened at a different time, would it have been as upsetting? So was there something going on with, there was something going on already with that day, or, and sometimes the thinking about if it was a different person involved is also, do you have history with the person that was involved, and that dictated a difference in the response versus if you had been having that conversation with a different person that you have a different relationship with. And then think of someone that you value and admire, and consider how they might have responded in the situation. And sometimes that can get you to what I'm going to try next time, is looking at someone who you consider to be maybe someone you admire for being spiritually intelligent, and how would they have addressed the situation. Then you've got becoming socially aware. We're getting close to time, so I'm going to speed through a little. But so this is our ability to accurately interpret the social environment, as well as infer the emotions of others in the environment. And so this is the part where we still are in this world environment with other people, right? And so this quote, is resolved to be tender with the young, compassionate with the aged, sympathetic with the striving, and tolerant with the weak and wrong. Sometime in your life, you will have been all of these things. So, I try to remember that when my wife will tell you when I am driving, that is where my spiritual intelligence takes a nosedive. And I often have to remind myself, I have probably been in someone's way. I have probably been driving too slow. I've probably not known where I was going in a tourist town. And you can tell I drive to Branson every day, but I work in Branson, and right now it's like the height of tourist season this is my test season of how tolerant I can be of all the different things.
Or you could
that
just
happen.
be already in a hurry, and so you're attracting people to slow down in front of you.
I'm always running late and in a hurry, yes. So it's my own doing, and I know this, and that's why I say it's not their fault. It's
So
not their
try
fault that you
it.
didn't get out of the house when you wanted to get out of the
Try
house.
when you get in the car to stop and say, okay, I am not in a hurry, this is gonna be a fun trip. I've hit every light going down Glenstone in the middle of the day in that kind of an attitude, where if, oh my God, I'm gonna be late, I hit every red light.
I do need to put that cloak on.
Great passage.
I do not remember to do that.
I did the math one time and realized that even when I was like not working it as fast as I reasonably could to get anywhere, I saved myself like 90 seconds. And so like actually, is the feeling for the next 15 minutes worth 90 seconds? And never,
Yeah.
never is.
So increasing self-awareness, one is self-care. So practicing self-care helps you be a more compassionate person towards others as well. Understanding your own emotions helps you recognize those things in other people and helps you respond differently. So people want to be around you more because you're more compassionate. Practicing and using empathy. For me, the difference between empathy and sympathy is so big. And so empathy is about the other person's perspective and feelings and showing that you understand, versus sympathy, which is a reflection of how you feel and the judgment that you're placing on their situation. So sympathy sounds like, oh, you poor thing. I feel so sorry for you. I'm sorry that's happening. I've lost my cursor. Oh,
It's one of those things after somebody dies and they come up and they go, oh, poor baby, I just want to cringe, go away from me, do not hug me and say that to me.
So empathy sounds like, that sounds really heavy. You must be feeling exhausted. When I went through something similar, I felt totally drained. Would it help if I came and sat with the kids for a while so you could get some rest? Which friend would you rather have sitting on your couch?
Yeah.
The one that's just like, oh, you poor thing. Sometimes that does feel good. Sometimes, it's not that sympathy is bad, it's just that sympathy is not complete in having social awareness and actually connecting with another individual. Like a true connection is empathy, because they understand, we feel, oh, you get it a little bit from my perspective, like you're trying to see it from my perspective.
If somebody is in the pit, it's not gonna help to jump in the pit with them.
Yeah.
You can throw them a rope and give them some food, but getting down there and wallowing in it with him is not gonna help.
Right. Yeah. They talk about it, oh, that's hard to read, isn't it? Paying attention to nonverbal cues and body language. So I've had this, I used to be a trainer in for another system, and this was always in there. So there's this research that they did some research on language and how we receive language from others. And so when we're communicating, only 7% of what we're communicating actually comes from the words that are coming out of our mouth. 7%. 38% is the tone of voice and the inflection that you're using while you're saying the words that are coming out of your mouth. And 55% is through our body language as we're saying the words that come out of our mouth. So when you're communicating with others, being aware of what nonverbal and what is my tone saying to them, as well as paying close attention to what that's saying to you can really increase the social awareness. And you'll see this, one of the funniest applications of this is, I don't know if you've seen the videos where like people are talking about, that babies don't know what you're talking about, they only know how you're talking about it. So maybe it's like a dad reading a car and driver magazine, but he's reading it in the tone of like, and then you take the transmission fluid, and then it's all about how you say it and not the actual words, and the baby is just sitting there, watching, because they're paying attention to all of that nonverbal stuff and not necessarily they don't have to grasp the words that are being said. They just know you're giving me attention and it sounds like you want to be here. And then surrounding yourself with people from diverse backgrounds. So openness to experiences can support our social awareness. We might learn new customs and cultures. It opens our mind to new ways of thinking and behaving around others, and just makes us a more well-rounded, socially aware person. And then the last part is managing relationships. And I love this quote. People aren't either wicked or noble. They're like chef salads with good things and bad things chopped up and mixed together in a vinaigrette of confusion and conflict. That's from Lemony Snicket. Anyway, but our relationship management is just how do we use all that together? How do we use this awareness that we've gained in our emotions, and how do we communicate clearly with others in a way that builds strong relationships and helps us value others and helps them value us as a part of their life. And so improving that, building high quality trust relationships, striving for authenticity, we talked about that. So showing up authentically allows relationships to be built on solid ground. Asking questions to seek to understand. So if you sense tension or other emotional reactions in a person through their body language or speech, ask questions to accurately assess what they might be feeling and respond in a way that strengthens the relationship. I catch people really off guard with this at work because they're not expecting you to, that's just not something that everybody does. And so when I actually say, okay, I need to clarify because I hear what you're saying, and it seems like through your body language that maybe you're not on board with this plan, or maybe you're not happy with this, or whatever. And a lot of times people are like, oh gosh, no, I just, my stomach hurts. Or they'll say something like, something is going on, or, no, something happened this morning before I got here, and I'm really trying to put it out of my mind, but it's kind of living there right now, and so don't pay attention to that. Or they might say, you know what, you're right. So I understand why we need to do it, but I'm still having a hard time with this. And then it helps you have a bigger conversation and have a better understanding of each other. I also do it a little bit proactively for people. In my role, I'm in a leadership role at work, and I find that people are very much looking at me to try to gauge the climate of the day. And so if I've got something going on, I can have a negative impact on everybody, and if I'm not trying to be aware of it. And so there's lots of times that, again, my staff is like, okay, but I'll say things, guys, just before we even start this meeting, allergies are really impacting my head this morning. If I'm squinting my eyes, it's because my contacts are blurry, or whatever. I'm not glaring at you, and then they'll be like, oh, okay, cool. And so then if I'm doing one of those, they'll be like, oh, your eyes are really bothering you, aren't they? So they still sometimes double check that, what you said is really true, right? And then I just say, oh yeah, it's really driving me nuts. I'm sorry, am I looking at you weird? And we can just go from that, and it just takes away all of this, oh, what's happening, and are we walking on eggshells around each other, and we don't know where we stand. And then the last is addressing conflict quickly. So be quick to settle disputes, differences of opinion or misunderstandings, instead of letting things build and grow and become ugly monsters that they don't need to be. Deal with them when they're tiny little monsters that you can move through quickly, or you can tame quickly. All right, so that was a lot there. So next week we're going to put it all together with spiritual intelligence. And when I was looking through kind of these connections, I was reminded, so Unity's third principle is we create our life experiences through our way of thinking. And so it's really talking, like that's this whole equation that we're putting together, that our emotional life is the effect and consequence of our thoughts and feelings that are predominant in our consciousness at any given time. And so the quality of our emotional life influences our spiritual progress, and the converse is also true, that our spiritual progress is having an impact on our emotional progress, and we'll talk about that next week. So thank you all for being here. That was a beautifully robust conversation, and I really enjoyed everything. There's announcements. Grab those. I always think that in my head too, Susan. All right, so the crisis cold weather season has ended. We had another successful season with 52 open nights, which means we filled 1,400 cots. We had 54 volunteers who worked actually in the shelter during the season, and then countless others who donated clothing, food, money, prepared food, sorted donations, and all kinds of things to help support that. Cleaned the church. Meditation is tonight at 6 p.m. It's open to everyone. This week, the Tuesday morning book club will be starting the book, The Biology of Belief by Bruce H. Lipton. And this is groundbreaking work in the field of new biology. All are welcome. That's Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Chair yoga has started now, and that's every Thursday at 9 a.m. Everyone's welcome to attend. The cost is $8 per session. I've heard it's phenomenal. I'm very disappointed that I have to work on Thursdays and can't be here for that. Our April Earth Care is the Planet Unity event, so try to be as involved as you can in the event. It takes everyone. Volunteer signups for Planet Unity and the yard sale are on the table in the foyer. There's also a list of items that we would like to borrow if you have them to make the event successful. We have enough toilet paper rolls for seed planting activity now. Friday, they created seed pouches, like over 700 toilet paper rolls have been acquired. So now we're needing empty plastic containers of all shapes and sizes for another activity that is going to happen for the kids at Planet Unity. Next Saturday is our Planet Unity recycling event. So that's for metal, electronics, and paper. There's no charge for the metal and electronics. They just ask no tube TVs. Are those still hanging around somewhere?
There's a few.
The paper shred company charges $5 a box, and it will be on-site shredding. So that's why there's a charge for that, because they charge us per box to be here. And that is secure shredding. So as soon as you hand it to them, they put it in the box, shred it, and it's done. Please join us for the second Saturday Social Unity. Will be also Saturday, April 13th at 1 o'clock. Deidre is hosting this month and lives across from the church on Luster. She would like everyone to park at the church and walk over and bring your favorite tea or coffee and a snack to share. Next Sunday, we'll continue this conversation on emotional intelligence and spiritual development as a part 2. And then also plan to stay after service to help clear the sanctuary and unload the pod to prepare for the yard sale at Planet Unity. Each week the flower merchant delivers flowers to be displayed on our Sunday morning service. If you would like to sponsor the flowers for a special occasion, there's a sign up on the bulletin board, and the cost is $50. You do get to take the flowers home with you after service. All right, that's enough. I always love it when we have so many things to announce. A lot of things going on here. All right, thank you all. We are complete. We'll circle up in the back.